Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Pranaya Karuna Gana Ganatvam Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Pranaya Karuna Gana Ganatvam Praptasya Kalyana Gurunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasura Sena Romanchakam Pasru Taranga Baju Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Shingaratanama Diramarjanado Juktasya Bhaktamsa Niyunjatapi Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Chaturvidha Shri Bhagavat Prasada Satvana Triptan Hari Bhakta Sangha Kritpaiva Truptim Bhajata Shadeva Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Shiradikamo Davayara Para Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namna Pratikshana Swa Dhanalalupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Nikunjayono Ratikeli Siddhai Jayali Virjokte Apekshaneya Tatrati Daksha Ati Balabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charana Vrindam सक्चाधरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रे रुक्तास्तथाव व्यतैव साधवे किन्तु प्रवर्ज प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरुश्री चरणरविन्दम् यस्य प्रसाद भगवत्प्रसाद यस्य प्रसाद न गति कुतोऽपि यस्य प्रसाद न गति कुतोऽपि दयां स्तुवं तस्य यस्त्रे सन्ध्यं वन्दे गुरुश्री चरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरुश्री चरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरुश्री चरणरविन्दम् नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमः भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसारी गौर भक्तवृंद श्री Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, oh, Hare Krishna, oh, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, oh, Hare Rama, oh, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hariyaraye Nama Krishna Jadavaye Nama Radhaye Jadavaye Madhavaye Kesavaye Nama Gopal Govindaram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhattaraguna Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasaraguna Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaur Haribo. Jai Vishnu Paramahansa Prabhajakacharya, Astutara Sarasisha Maharaj Divine Grace, Abhachar Vina Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Pratishta Viviti Samstapakachara Vaishnava Siromani Patita Pavana Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Gauriya Guru Varga Patita Udhar Ki Jai, Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhattara Gunata Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Guna Sat Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Nama Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai, Ananta Kuchi Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai, Prem se Koho Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasari, Gaur Bhakta Vrind Ki Jai, Jai Param Dayal Se Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai, Jai Pramanama Sankirtaneka Janaka Prema Purushottama, Shri Sachinandan Shman Gauranga Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari, Mahavranaya Avatar Ki Jai, Golokera Pramadhana, Harinam Sankirtan Jaga Ki Jai, Juga Dharma Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai, Brihat Nidanga Translator Book Distribution Seva Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopakutna Radha Kund, Syama Kund Giriraj Gopodhan Ki Jai, Shri Brajabhum Vrindavan Mathurdam Ki Jai, The Lordship Shri Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai, Shri Shri Maya Punavadvip Eka Chakradham Ki Jai, परम करुणा श्री श्री गौर निताय की जय, श्री पुरुषोत्तम कित्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय, श्री जगन्नाथ स्वामी बलदेव प्रभु सुभद्रा देवी सुदर्शन चक्र भगवान की जय, भक्ति सर्व विघ्न विनाशन कनिष्ठिंगरे भगवान की जय, जय गंगा माय जमुना माय की जय, तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी भक्ति देवी की जय, श्री मथुरा राधारानी की जय, समवेत भक्तबिंद की जय, निताय गौरी प्रमानंदी. All glory to the Assembly bodies. All glory to the Assembly bodies. All glory to the Assembly bodies. All glories, all glories, all glory to Shri Shri Guru Shri Gauranga. Jai.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Krishna Narari Rupa Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare
Jaya Narasimha Dev, Jaya Narasimha Dev, Jaya Narasimha Dev, Jaya Narasimha Dev.
Jaya Nrsimha Dev, Jaya Nrsimha Dev, Nrsimha Dev, Jaya Nrsimha Dev.
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj.
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Prabhu,
जय श्री श्री भक्ति पर सर्व विघ्नाशन करण सिंह हरे भगवान की जय। जय भक्त श्रेष्ठ प्रहलाद महाराज की जय। निताय गौर हरि प्रेमानंद हरि बोल। श्री वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सतवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सतवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सतवताय नमो नमः। श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्णा प्रेयसी नमो नमः
तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्णा प्रेयसी नमो नमः
तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः।
राधा कृष्णा सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो हे Krishna seva pava heyo vilasi
जितो मारा शरण लो तारा वंचा पूर्ण हो
Tamara sharanala Taravancha purna
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावन वासी
Kripa kare karatare Vrindavanavasi
मोराए अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास
Morae abela Vilasa kunje diyava
नयने हरिबो सदा जुगल रूपरासी
Aminayane revasada Jugada luparasi
এই নিবেদনা ধারো সাখির অনুগাতা করো
Ene vedana dhara Sakirayano Gataka
সেবাধিকারা দিয়ে করো নিজদাসী
Sevayade kara diye karani jadase
दीना कृष्णा दासे कोए जीना मोरा होए
Na Krishna das koi e namora
श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा जीना भासी
Shri Radha Govinda preme sadaye navasi
श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा जीना भासी
Shri Radha Govinda preme sadaye navasi
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे
Jani kani sapapani Brahma hatari kani sa Tani tani prana santi Pradachina pare pare
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Tani kani sapapani Brahma hatari kani sa Tani tani prana santi Pradachina pare pare
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Kani sapapani brahmachari kani sa Tani tani prana santi pradachina pare pare
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी
जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी
जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी
जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी
नित्य गौरा हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौरा हरि बोल नित्य गौरा हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौरा हरि बोल। श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की जय।
श्री वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सतभक्त नमो नमः। वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी शतवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी शतवताय नमो नमः। श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की जय। Oh Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire is to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you as wishes fulfilled, bestowing myself on him, be making resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also give me a residence like the groves of Sri Vrindavan home. As within my vision, I'll always behold beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a fellow Kavan damsels of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me honored servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna praise. May I always sing in love with Shri Radha and Govind. Srimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna ki jai. Teto Dasanamajanam Shri Akarajamachandika Vitaranam Vidyavadu Jeevanam Anandam Nivartanam Vidipadam Purnamritaswaranam Sarvatmasnam Param Param Vijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Nam Hari Nam Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Kum Ki Jai. Om Mahabalanaya Krishna Prem Namni Guru Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of the dust that melt for years, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life to repeated birth and death. The Sankirtan movement is the primary addiction for humanity at large. God is raised in the addiction movement. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govind. In these transcendental names, you have invested with your transcendental energies. There's not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself Lord on the throne of the street, one should be more tolerant than a tree,
devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others.
In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause and devotion service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, some or other fall in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at the lotus feet. O my Lord, why will my eyes be decorated with tears of love, flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? Or will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on the end of the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so, even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is my worshipful Lord, unconditional. Shri Krishna Ki Jai.
Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinam Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Mani Pachari Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatirasta Srimad Bhagavatam Grantara.
The offenses involving chanting the holy name of the Lord that must be avoided. They are as follows. 1.
To blaspheme devotees who dedicate their lives to propagating holy names of the Lord.
2.
Consider the names of the demigods, like Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent names of the Lord Vishnu.
3.
To disobey the orders of the spiritual master.
4.
Blaspheme the Vedic literature pursuant to the Vedic version.
5.
To consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna as imagination.
6.
To give some interpretation on the holy name of the Lord.
7.
To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord.
8.
To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruit of activities of karmakanda.
9.
To instruct the faithless person about the glories of the holy name.
And 10.
To not have complete faith in the chanting of the holy names, and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It is also an offense to inattention while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desire trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Vaishnava Thakur ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Vani Pracharini Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatistai Srimad Bhagavatam Grantha Raja Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Janmadyasya yato nivayadi taratascha suavigyaswarat.
Janmadyasya yatam vayaditarataschatir
Tene
swavigya.
Brahma Hirdaya Adhikavaye Muyanti Yatsurayaha.
Tene Brahmarudaya Adhikavaye Mojantija Suraya.
Tejo Varimidam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Chisargomesha.
Tejo Varimridan Jata Vinimayo Jatra Trisargumrisa.
Damna Svena Sadani Rastakuha Kam Satyam Param Dhimahi.
Namna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyang Param Dhimahi.
O my Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva,
O my Lord Shri Krishna Son of
O
Vasudev,
all-pervading personality of Godhead,
O all-pervading personality of
I offer
God,
my respectful obeisances unto you.
I offer my respectful obeisances
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth
and meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because He is the absolute
and the primeval cause of all causes,
and the primeval cause of all causes
of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested
of the
universes.
creation, sustenance, destruction, manifested
He
universe.
is directly and indirectly conscious of all
He is
manifestations.
directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he is independent because there's no other cause beyond him.
And He is independent because there is no other cause beyond
It
Him.
is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji,
It is She only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart
the
of
original
man,
living
the
being.
original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By Him, even the great sages and demigods are pleasant to the
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations
As one is bewildered by the illusory representation
of water seen on fire or land seen on water,
water seen the fire, land seen on the water.
only because of him do the material universes,
Only because of Him do the material universe
temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature,
temporarily manifested by the reaction of the three modes of
appear factual although they are unreal.
nature. Appear factual, although they are
I
unreal.
therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna,
I therefore meditate upon Him, Lord Shri
who
Krishna,
is eternally existent in the transcendental abode,
who is eternal existence in the transcendental,
which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
which is forever free from the illusory representation.
I
of the
meditate
material
upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
world. I meditate upon Him, for He is the absolute
Dharma
truth.
Pujita Kaitravotra
Dharma Prajita Kaitava.
Paramo Nimatsaranam Satam
Paramo Nimishanam.
Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu
Vedyam Vastavamastu.
Shivadam Tapatrayon Mulanam
Shivadam Tapo.
Shrimad Bhagavate Mahamani Krite
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamani
Kim Vaparir Ishwaraha
Kimva Paririshvaraha.
Sadyo Hridi Avarudyate Cha
Sadyurudhya Varudyatitra.
Kriti Bihi Sususubistakshana.
Kritvihi Shishushuvistakyana.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are material motive.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth,
This Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth,
which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure. in
The
heart.
highest truth is reality, distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
The highest truth is the reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity,
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by great sage Vyasadeva is
is
maturity.
sufficient in itself for God realization.
Is sufficient itself for God.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam,
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of
by
Bhagavatam,
this culture of
by
knowledge,
this culture,
the
of knowledge,
Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
the Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam,
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
sukhamukad amrita dravya sangatam,
Drava sangitam.
pipata bhagavatam rasam alayam,
Ivata bhagavatam rasamalayam.
muhur aho raskabu vibhavakaha.
Mura hura sikabu vivaha.
O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam,
O expert and thoughtful man, relish
the mature fruit of the desired true Vedic literatures.
the mature fruit of the desired fruit of Vedic
It
literature.
emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
It emanated from the lips of Shishugara.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
Although its nectarian juice was all relishable,
including liberated souls.
including liberals.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna,
Sarvatam Swakata Krishna.
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Punnashvana Kirtana.
Vidyantakstohi Bhadrani,
Vidyantastuhya Bhadrani.
Vidunoti Srihitsatam.
Vidunoti Suritsatam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
To hear about Krishna from the Vedic,
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
or to hear from it directly through
is
the
itself righteous activity.
It is self-righteous.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
and for one who hears about Lord Krishna,
Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna is dwelling within everyone.
acts as a best wishing friend.
acts as the best wishing
and
friend,
purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
and purifies the devotee constantly engages in hearing.
Nasta presu bhadresu
Nasta Preshwa Bhadeshu
nityam bhagavata sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Seva
bhagavati uttama-sloke
Bhagavati Uttama Sloke
bhaktir bhavati naistaki.
Bhakti Bhavati Nast.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge.
In this way, devotee naturally develops dormant transcendental
As he
knowledge.
hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavad
and from the
and
devotees,
from the
he
devotee,
becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
Tadarajastamo bhava
Tada Rajastamo Bhava
kamalobhadayascha
Kamalobhadayascha
chetetaranabhidam
Chaitaitaranavi
stitvam sattve prasidati.
Stitam Sadve Prasidati.
By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional
one
service,
becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance,
one becomes freed from the modes of passion
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
Evam prasana manaso
Evam prasanamana
bhagavat bhakti yogataha
Bhagavat Bhakti Yoga
bhagavat tattva vijnanam
Bhagavat Tattva Vijnana
mukta sangasya jayate.
Mukta Sangasa Jayate.
When these impurities are wiped away,
When these impurities are wiped
the
away,
candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness,
the candidate remains steady in his position of
becomes
pure
enlivened by devotional service,
goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional
and
service,
understands the science of God perfectly.
and understand the signs of God perfectly.
Vidyate hridaya grantis,
Vidyate Hridaya Granthi
chidyante sarva samsaya,
Chidyante Sarvasamsaya
shiyante jasya karmani,
Jiyante Chasakarmani
tusta evat manishware.
Tutta Evatmanishwari.
Thus, bhakti yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
Thus the Bhakti Yoga serves the heart of
and
material
enables one to
affection,
come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
and enables one to come at one to the stage of Samsham Samagramam,
understanding of the supreme absolute truth personality of Godhead.
understanding with the supreme absolute truth personality of Godhead.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotees in Krishna consciousness
can one understand the science of Krishna.
can one understand the science of Krishna.
Shri Guru Vastika prayers ki jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it.
The spiritual master receiving benediction from the Krishna master, just as the cloud pours water when the forest fire extinguishes.
So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material
So the
existence.
spiritual master delivers the material afflicted world by extinguishing the fire of blazing.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities.
Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments.
Chanting the holy name, dancing next to singing and playing musical
The
instruments.
spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya
The
Mahaprabhu,
spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind.
because his relation to mellows of pure devotion within his mind.
Sometimes his hair stands on end.
Sometimes his hair stands
He
on
feels
end.
quivering in his body,
His feelings quivering in his
and
body,
tears flow from his eyes like waves.
and tears flow from his eyes like
I offer
waves.
my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance to the lotus feet of such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna.
The spiritual master always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Radha, and
He also engages his disciples in such worship.
he also engaged disciples in such worship.
They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments,
They dress the deities in the beautiful clothes and
clean their temple,
clean the temple,
and perform other similar worship of the Lord.
and perform other similar worship of the
I
Lord.
offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of such
The
a
spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food.
The spiritual master always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food.
Analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked.
Analyze that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sight.
When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada,
When the spiritual master sees that devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasad,
he is satisfied.
he is
I
satisfied.
offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto lotus feet of such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava.
The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant of unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava,
And their qualities, names, and forms.
and their qualities, names, and
The
forms.
spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment.
The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual
The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan.
The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in seen that God will in different time make different tasteful arrangement for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conscious loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan.
I offer my most humble obeisances unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord.
The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord.
This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities.
This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities.
Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hari Krishna.
Therefore, I offer my humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hari Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one received the benediction of Krishna.
Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement.
Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement.
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master.
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master.
At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master.
At least 3 times a day, I shall offer a respectful obeisance to the lotus feet of my spiritual master.
Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai. Ishwara Pranama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Nanadiraja Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam.
Ishvara Parama Krishna Sakchit Ananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karana
Chintamani Prakara Satma Sukalpa Vriksha
Tintamani Prakada Sadma Sukalpa Viksha
Laksavrite Susurabhira Vipalayantam
Lakshya Viteshi Surabhira Vipalayantam
Lakshmi Sahasra Sata Sambrahma Sevyamanam
Lakshmi Sahasha Shata Sambrahma Sevyamana
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Venam Kvanantam Aravinda Dalayataksam
Venum Kvanantam Aravinda Dayalitam
Parhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam
Param Vata Samasitam Buddha Sundaranga
Kandarpakoti Kamaniya Visesha Sobam
Kandapakoti Kamaniya Vishesha Shobham
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Alola Chandra Kala Sadvanamalya Vamsi
Alola Chandra Kala Sarvanamalya Vamsi
Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam
Nannang Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilas
Shyamam Tribanga Lalitani Yata Prakasam
Shyamam Tribhanga Lalitam Niyata Prakasham
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Anyagani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti
Angani Yasa Sakalindriya Vrittimanti
Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiram Jaganti
Asyanti Panti Kalayanti Chiram Jaganti
Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya
Ananda Chinmaya Sadujala Vigrahasya
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam
Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam
Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha
Adyam Purana Purusham Navajauvanam Cha
Vede Sudurlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakto
Vede Shudurlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakto
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Pantastu Koti Satavatsara Sampragamyo
Antastu Koti Sadavassara Sampragami
Vayuratapi Manaso Munipungamanam
Vayorathapi Manaso Muni Pungavan
Sobhyasti Yad Prapadasim Yavichintya Tattve
Sophyastya Pravadasim Vinchatinchatat
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Ekopya Sora Chayatam Jagadanda Kotim
Ekopya Sura Chachitum Jagadanta Kuti
Yaschakti Rasti Jagadanda Chayayadanta
Yakshati Rasti Jagananda Chayayadanta
Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam
Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarashta
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami
Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajastataiva
Yad Bhava Bhavita Dhiyo Manujastathaiva
Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusaha
Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusha
Suktaryameva Nigama Pratitaistavanti
Shuktedya Eva Nigama Pratitans
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, verse number 8. Apam viryasya sargasya
Pam Viyasa Sagasya
parjanyasya prajapate
Parjanyasya Prajapati
pumsa sisna upastastu
Pumsa Shishna Upashtastu
prajatyananda nirvite.
Prajatyanandani.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada. From the Lord's genitals originate water, semen, generatives, rains, and the procreators. His genitals are the cause of a pleasure that counteracts the distress of begetting. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The genitals and the pleasure begetting counteract the distresses of family encumbrances. One would cease to generate altogether if there were not, by the grace of the Lord, a coating, a pleasure-giving substance on the surface of the generative organs. This substance gives a pleasure so intense that it counteracts fully the distress of family encumbrances. A person is so captivated by this pleasure-giving substance that he is not satisfied by begetting a single child, but increases the number of children, with great risk in regard to maintaining them, simply for this pleasure-giving substance. This pleasure-giving substance is not false, however, because it originates from the transcendental body of the Lord. In other words, the pleasure-giving substance is a reality, but it has taken on an aspect of pervertedness on account of material contamination. In the material world, sex life is the cause of many distresses on account of material contact. Therefore, the sex life in the material world should not be encouraged beyond the necessity. There is a necessity for generating progeny, even in the material world, but such generation of children must be carried out with full responsibility for spiritual values. The spiritual values of life can be realized in the human form of material existence, and the human being must adopt family planning with reference to the context of spiritual values, and not otherwise. The degraded form of family restriction by use of contraceptives, etc., is the grossest type of material contamination. Materialists who use these devices want to fully utilize the pleasure potency of the coating on the genitals by artificial means, without knowing the spiritual importance. And without knowledge of spiritual values, the less intelligent man tries to utilize only the material sense pleasure of the genitals. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. From the Lord's genitals originate water, semen, generatives, rains, and the procreators. His genitals are the cause of a pleasure that counteracts the distress of begetting. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So this is a very clear understanding of what keeps us in the material world suffering birth after birth, and being subjected to the laws of nature, meaning birth, old age, disease, and death, which are superfluous to the soul. The soul is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and its natural state is to be always increasing in ecstasy in relationship with Krishna and the spiritual world. But when we become envious of Krishna, we cannot stay in the spiritual world because there's no envy of Krishna in the spiritual world. So we're placed in the material world and subjected to the laws of nature, which and in 6 different stages. One is born, one grows, one stays and maintains, and then one gives off byproducts, in other words, has children, and then one begins to dwindle, and then one dies. So this is inevitable. One cannot change this process or these laws of nature. And if one misuses the human form of life, instead of engaging in self-realization, understanding, meaning ourselves in relationship to Krishna and understand. So our relationship to Krishna is Jivera Swarupahaya Nityara Krishna Das. We are the eternal, our real position or our real identity is to be the eternal servant of Krishna. But if we ignore this, then we are put in a cycle of repeated birth and death, and it's almost impossible to get out of it as long as we engage in mundane sexual activities. And this is explained in depth in the different parts of the Bhagavatam, and we'll go through a quick review of those parts. So in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 8, verse 35, it says, "The Lord is great. The only function of the living being is to render service to the Lord. The Lord is great, and the living beings are subordinate to him. Therefore, the duty of the living being is just to serve him only. Unfortunately, the illusioned living beings, out of misunderstanding only, become servants of the senses by material desire. This desire is called avidya, or nescience, and out of such desire the living being makes different plans for material enjoyment centered around a perverted sex life. He therefore becomes entangled in the chain of birth and death by transmigrating into different bodies on different planets under the direction of the Supreme Lord. Unless, therefore, one is beyond the boundary of this nescience, or ignorance, one cannot get free from the threefold miseries of material life, that is the law of nature." So, we are placed in the material world. We come under the influence of the three modes of material nature. We've discussed this point many times before, but I'll just review it quickly. The three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, keep us chained to the cycle of birth and death. And we are always, let's say, harassed by the fluctuating modes of nature. Like when you sleep at night, you're completely in the mode of ignorance. When you wake up, you sort of perk up a little bit and go into the mode of passion. And later on in the day, maybe because some training one may function somewhat in the mode of goodness, but all these three modes are fluctuating constantly, so they're never actually pure. So even the mode of goodness is not pure, and therefore we go over and over again under the influence of these modes, and therefore everything we do, we're actually being forced to do it, although we claim to be independent. So no one is independent of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And all these things we're forced to do, although we might think we are deciding to do it, but actually we're not. You get hungry, you have to eat. You eat, you have to pass stool. You work, you get tired, and then being very tired, you have to sleep, and then you wake up and you're forced to work again. And then we're breathing all the time, we're blinking our eyes all the time, and we're also seeking, to reproduce. All these things are forced on us. We're not independent at all. However, if one is fortunate enough to come in contact with genuine spiritual teachers and authorities, the problem there's also a problem there, because 98% of the so-called teachers or gurus are false. They're simply encouraging one to continue in the cycle of birth and death by being elevated a little bit in the mode of goodness, and thus being able to attain the higher material planets where there's more increased sense gratification and there's more, let's say, material facilities. So the Earth is in the middle part of the planets in the universe. Below the Earth are the lower planets where life is miserable, more miserable than the Earth. On the Earth, it's mixed. There's some misery and there's some happiness. On the heavenly planets, there's much more happiness and much less misery, but one is still a prisoner of the cycle of birth, old age, disease, and death, even on the highest planets in the material world. So one must go beyond the material world to the spiritual world. But to do that, our innate envy of God has to be purified. And that can only be done in the association of genuine devotees who do not teach us that you can do certain pujas and get material benefits. They explain that this is not the purpose of doing puja. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita, by the way. So one of the biggest misconceptions in modern Hinduism is that doing these different pujas, one can advance materially. So if they do the pujas and don't advance materially, then they give them up and they just work to become Microsoft certified or Amazon certified or whatever, and just avoid any spiritual activity at all. However, in the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, 5th verse, it says, Yagya dana tapa karma na tyajyam karyam evatat. Yagyo danam tapaschaiva pavanani manishsinam. Acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up. They must be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great souls. Then the next verse says, Etanyapi tu karmani sangam tyakva falanicha karta vyaniti me parta nischitam matam uttamam. All these activities should be performed without attachment or any expectation of result. They should be performed as a matter of duty, O son of Prita. That is my final opinion. So this is Krishna speaking. There's no higher authority than Krishna. And the explanation of this verse follows. Although all sacrifices are purifying, one should not expect any result by such performances. In other words, all sacrifices which are meant for material advancement in life should be given up. But sacrifices that purify one's existence and elevate one to the spiritual plane should not be stopped. Everything that leads to Krishna consciousness must be encouraged. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also it is said that any activity which leads to devotional service to the Lord should be accepted. That is the highest criterion of religion. A devotee of the Lord should accept any kind of work, sacrifice, or charity which will help him in the discharge of devotional service to the Lord. So here we see the major fault, one of the major faults, there are many others, of modern Hinduism. These so-called brahmanas and priests, maybe not all of them, but a large majority, are performing these Vedic sacrifices for material benefit of the yajaman, or the person desiring it. And the proof of this is that they will ask the sponsor of the sacrifice to say in the beginning, mama. Now in Sanskrit, mama means for me. But we just read what Krishna says, that all these sacrifices or yagyas should be performed as a matter of duty without any expectation of personal result. So, and then, in other words, all sacrifices which are meant for material advancement in life should be given up. But sacrifices that purify one's existence and elevate one to the spiritual plane should not be stopped. So, what is the difference between a sacrifice for material advancement and a sacrifice for spiritual advancement? The difference is this word mama. When the priest says, repeat the word mama in the beginning of, let's say, Satyanarayana Puja, the person who says mama is saying, this is for me. This is for me. This is not for God, it's for me. See, this is nonsense. We can see this is a direct violation of Lord Krishna's instruction. But of course, the modern brahmanas, most of them, not all of them maybe, but most of them, will have the person say mama, and the idea is that they're paying the priest to perform this ceremony so that their business will do better, or their grandmother's sickness will get better, or their son will get a better grade on the SAT test, or they want to get a raise in their business or in their career. All these things are nonsense, and it only keeps people anchored in the cycle of birth and death because there's misinformation. The Christians always talk about the devil, but in Vedic tradition, we don't talk about the devil. We talk about misinformation. So this false narrative that the sacrifices for the person's personal benefit is not only wrong, but it will be like a curse, and will because in order to get the benefits from materialistic sacrifices, one has to take birth again. So the purpose of human life is to be liberated from the cycle of birth and death and return back to where we came from, which is the spiritual world. So asking people or encouraging people to do these type of sacrifices for their own material benefit is actually a curse. It's not a benediction. Now, why would modern brahmanas do that? Because they make money doing it. And it's a business proposition. You give me some money, I'll perform this sacrifice, and you will make more money, or you will have better sense gratification, or you'll be promoted to the heavenly planets where you'll get longer life and more sense gratification, like on Indraloka or Swarga. So this is the sad state of modern Hinduism. And because of this, people become bewildered and they remain materialistic. They don't actually become spiritually inclined. Now, if a husband and wife decide, wait a minute, what is our actual goal in life? Well, number one, okay, we're having children, we're going to have a family, but our duty should be to raise the children to be God conscious. And in the process, we should also be God conscious, because how can we encourage our children to be God conscious if we ourselves are not God conscious? So we see the main stumbling block on this whole enterprise of being able to become self-realized to such a point that we understand our relationship with Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we are His eternal servant, and engage the rest of our life in acts of devotion to the Lord. So that is exactly what we teach in this temple. The whole purpose of this temple is to orient people toward serving God or serving Krishna. But if you serve yourself, it's a selfish life. If you serve God, you're not selfish. And the result of that is Krishna Prasadam, in the form of teaching, in the form of food, and in the form of many other cultural events. And so therefore, it's sharing, whereas selfish life is hoarding. You have locked doors, and you have insurance policies, and you have guns, and you have every type of way to protect your little fiefdom for sense gratification. But the devotees have an open life in which everything they do, they share it with others, so that everyone has an equal chance to develop spiritual life and eventually love for God and go back to Godhead. So here it says, the desire is called avidya or nescience, and out of such desire, the living being makes different plans for material enjoyment centered around a perverted sex life. He or she therefore become entangled in the chain of birth and death by transmigrating into different bodies on different planets under the direction of the Supreme Lord. So there are 8,400,000 species that we can take birth in. 400,000 of those species are human species, but most of them are not civilized. There are very few humans who are civilized. Now, how do you differentiate between an uncivilized human being and a civilized human being? The civilized human being follow rules and regulations of the Vedic scriptures. And the uncivilized human beings just engage in sense gratification, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, just like the animals. The only thing that differentiates a human being from an animal is the fact that they try to understand why they're trapped in the cycle of birth and death, how they got into this situation, and how they're going to get out of it. And that is only available in the Vedic literature, and especially the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is what we're studying now. These are the two supreme scriptures of the entire Vedas. The Vedas are vast, but the Bhagavad Gita is the quintessential text, and it's relatively short. It's only 700 verses, in which you can understand the entire Vedic philosophy very easily. And it's summarized in two verses. One says, Daivihi esa gunamai, mama maya duradaya, mam evaye prapadyante, mayam etam tarantite. This verse says, 7th chapter, 14th verse of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, this material nature of mine is impossible to overcome. You can use any strategy you want, modern science or logic and reason or whatever you want to do. You're not going to be able to overcome the laws of nature, birth, death, old age, and disease. However, he says, one who surrenders unto me can easily overcome the material nature and go back to Godhead. So what is impossible to do becomes possible by dedicating oneself, mind, senses, and body, and everything, money, everything in the service of the Lord. Then one can easily overcome the negative and vicious cycle of birth and death and go back to Godhead for eternal life and eternal bliss. So what is impossible becomes possible by the mercy of Krishna. And then the second verse, Sarvadharmam Parityajya Mami Kamsaranam Brajaham Tvam Sarvapapebhyo Mokshishyami Ma Suchaha. It's the 18th chapter, 66th verse, which Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, just give up all your fabricated dharmas and surrender unto me. That is the highest principle of dharma. Sharanam, surrendering to the Lord. So that's the whole message of Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, refuses to follow Krishna's instruction. But intelligently, he submits the question. He says, my Lord, I'm not going to follow your instruction. But if you can answer all my questions to my satisfaction, then I will do whatever you say. So then for all bona fide spiritual literatures are questions and answers. The living entity has a lot of questions. How did I get into this mess of birth, death, old age, and disease? How am I going to get out of this mess of birth, death, old age, and disease? What is the real purpose of life? What is my origin, and what is my eternal status or position? So these are all fundamental questions. Most people hardly ever ask them. But there are a few people that start asking these questions because they're suffering, usually. They see the pain and suffering is the main theme of material life. And so they're trying to find out why this is happening, because they don't want suffering. They're working to be happy, they're working to protect themselves, but yet suffering comes. Just like one little virus can upend an entire world. We just experienced that, and it's still going on. And then there's war, and there's pestilence, and there's economic downturns, and then there's diseases and death. And all these things are painful. Like when a child is born, is the child laughing or crying? The child is crying when the child is born. And at the end of life, most people are lamenting, and feeling very, miserable. So that is the real nature of the material world. However, the spiritual world is completely different, because people are not envious, people are not selfish. People who have been trained in Krishna consciousness are transcendental to all these negative properties or qualities. So then, again, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it also explains the path of salvation. This is the Canto 1, Chapter 11, verse 36. The path of salvation, or the path going back to Godhead, always forbids the association of fallen women and fallen men. And the complete Sanatan Dharma or Varnashram Dharma scheme forbids or restricts association with others for sense gratification. How then can one be accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is addicted to more than well, in the case of Krishna, he had 16,000 wives. So one can say, well, when the whole path of salvation is not being attached to sense gratification, how come Krishna has 16,000 wives? It looks like he's attached to sense gratification. This question may be relevantly raised by inquisitive persons really anxious to know about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. And to answer such questions, the sages at Naimisharanya have discussed the transcendental character of the Lord in this and in following verses. It is clear herein that the feminine attractive features which can conquer Cupid or even the supermost tolerant Lord Shiva could not conquer the senses of the Lord. So it's referring to Lord Shiva when he wanted to see the Lord's form as a woman called Mohini Murti. Because one time Krishna manifested a form as Mohini Murti to bewilder the demons and to award the demigods with the pot of nectar, if you know the story. I'm not going to tell the story now, but Lord Shiva was not present when this took place, when it was a tug of war between the demons and the demigods. And during this tug of war, they churned the ocean of milk and produced many wonderful things and some bad things. So one of the most wonderful things was Dhanvantari, who comes out with a pot of amrita, or nectar, of immortality. So as soon as he appeared with that pot of nectar of immortality, due to the churning, the demons stole it because they wanted to be eternal. And to stop this, Krishna takes the form of Mohini Murti, this absolutely gorgeous woman, bewilders the demons, or the asuras, and rescues the pot and promises them that she will give them one drop of nectar each if they sit down quietly and don't make any disturbance. But she will begin by putting a drop in the mouth of each demigod, and then she'll put it in the mouth of the demons. Well, the demons were so enamored by her beauty, so all demons are like that. They go to see all these girly shows, and they're always seeking after exploiting women for sex life. So they were so enamored by her exquisite beauty that they actually accepted to sit down quietly and wait for the demigods to get a drop of the nectar, and then they would get a drop. But they never got any drop because it was a trick. So Lord Shiva heard about this pastime of the Lord, and he met the Lord and Krishna, and he said, listen, I heard about this amazing form that you manifested as Mohini Murti, but I wasn't there to see it. Can you please manifest that form so I can see it? So Lord Shiva was with Parvati at that time. He's always with her. And Lord Krishna smiled. He said, you really want to see this? And he said, yes. I heard how beautiful it was. He said, okay. So he manifests this form, and Lord Shiva becomes totally bewildered and tries to grab Mohini Murti, even though his wife is standing next to him, and Mohini starts running away, and he starts chasing her. So anyway, I'm not going to tell the whole story, if you want to hear this whole story, which is very interesting. But this is what is being referred to here. It says, or even the supermost tolerant Lord Shiva could not conquer the senses of the Lord. Cupid's business is to invoke mundane lust. The whole universe is moving, being agitated by Cupid's arrow. The activities of the world are being carried on by the central attraction of male and female. A male is searching after a mate to his liking, and the female is looking after a suitable male. That is the way of material stimulus. And as soon as a male is combined with a female, the material bondage of the living being is at once tightly interlocked by sex relation, and as a result of this, both the male's and the female's attraction for sweet home, motherland, bodily offspring, society, and friendship, and accumulation of wealth becomes the illusory field of activities, and thus a false but indefatigable, which means an unending, attraction for the temporary material existence, which is full of miseries, is manifest. So this goes on, but I'm not going to read the rest of it. The idea is that we have two choices in life, and that's the limit of our free will. One is we will follow Krishna's instructions, and two is we refuse to follow Krishna's instructions. If we refuse to follow Krishna's instructions, we remained completely illusioned in this material world, working like asses, suffering all kinds of miseries, but accepting these miseries because there's some little bit of pleasure in sex life. So that sexual pleasure that one experiences is enough to make them suffer all the other travails of material life. And there are many travails. And I mean, some of the worst is seeing people that you love die. And also there's sickness, and also there's economic downturn, and then there's war, and there's pestilence, and all these things are happening. But we're willing to tolerate them because of a little bit of sensual pleasure that we get. So when a husband and wife wake up, or when men and women wake up and say, look, this is crazy. Let's figure out how we're going to become liberated from this whole vicious cycle. That's when spiritual life begins. And it's usually because of severe suffering that people start asking questions like that. Why am I suffering? Is it God's fault or is it my fault? So most people will blame God. But people that are intelligent, they say, well, God is not forcing me to be like this. I'm the one who chose to smoke marijuana. I'm the one who chose to have illicit sex. I'm the one who chose to go to the nightclub. I'm the one who chose to cheat on my IRS filing, and I'm the one that chose to do this. So these personal choices are always there, and Krishna will not interfere with that. He gives every one of us limited free will. But we're limited just to either accepting his instructions, like Arjuna does by the end of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Nasta mohir smitir labva tat prasadat muichyata stitosmi gata sandeha karishya vachanam tava. He said, my dear Lord, now my moha, my illusion is over. And my Lord, by the way, this is your best prasad. You have eliminated my illusion by instructing me, by answering all my questions, by very lovingly being patient with me and leading me step by step from ignorance to knowledge, or as it says, tamasima jyotirgama. Go from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, right? So that is your real prasad, your real mercy, Krishna. Stitosmi gata sandeha. Now I'm situated in my right position as your eternal servant, and I don't have any doubts anymore in my mind about this, that this is the actual real purpose of human life. And Karishya Vachanam Tava, the ultimate statement of faith in God, whatever you say, Krishna, that's what I'm going to do. I'm no longer going to speculate. I'm no longer going to read this philosopher or that philosopher. They're all philosophers. They're not real philosophers. I'm just going to follow your instructions, Krishna. So that is the correct use of our free will. And the incorrect use of free will is, I don't care what God says, whatever I think, that's what I'm going to do. So that will leave one as a eternal victim of ignorance. Okay, so then we come back to this verse today where it says that there's a pleasure-giving substance that coats the genitals of male and female. And it's because of this pleasure-giving substance that people are willing to put up with all the suffering in life. So, and we see, it says, in the material world, sex life is the cause of many distresses on account of material contact. Therefore, the sex life in the material world should not be encouraged beyond the necessity. So, there's nothing wrong with having children, but it's wrong if one continues to engage in sex life and not take the very, very serious purpose of instructing the children to become genuine devotees. So the whole continuity of the sex life is all the years it takes to educate your children to become genuine devotees. genuine servants of the Lord, to instill in them this Sanatan Dharma mode of life. That is the completion of the sexual act. It's not just the sexual act, it's educating the result of it, the child. So that's the real purpose of husband and wife in this material world. If they are going to bring children into the world, then they have to take the responsibility of educating their children properly, so that they're not misled by modern education, which is all nonsense. It teaches all ridiculous things about life. We all come from monkeys. It all started with a big bang. There's gender neutrality. There's critical race theory. There's analysis of the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. All these nonsense theories that just confuse people and make them slaves of big multinational companies that exploit them and give them some money so that they work like asses day and night and completely ignore spiritual life. Look what outsourcing has done to India. It's ruined the spiritual life of people in India. They have to get up at night and service American crazy people for buying things and spending all their time doing that. And on the way home, they stop in a bar and they drink some liquor. And what this has ruined the whole life in India, in the big cities. By the way, would you agree with that, Prabhu? I mean, people are staying up all night so they can service American buyers, American customers for big companies. It's crazy, right? Whereas before people were living in villages. They had plenty of time for spiritual life, and they raised their families. They could have many kids also, and the kids became good people because they learned the trade of the father, and they learned to live simple and honest life. And this went on for millions of years in India. And now, just because you can make more money working in these high-tech companies in Bangalore and Chennai and other places, it ruined their lives, and completely ignore spiritual life, or they'll go to phony gurus who teach them how they can develop mystical powers or do better in their business or whatever. So the whole thing has become turned upside down. The real purpose of spiritual life is not understood anymore by most people, and the Brahmanas are simply exploiting them for money. And if they can get the same thing without going to the Brahmana, but by going to Microsoft or Amazon, then they'll do that, because the whole purpose is sense gratification. It's not anything. There's no question of love of God. So if they can do better materially, just by ignoring the pujas and just working like an ass, that's what they do. So, therefore, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and then we'll stop with this last point. In the 3rd chapter, it says, Avritim jnanam etena, jnanino nitya vairina, kama rupena konteya, duspuren nalenacha. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. And in the explanation of this verse by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he says, it is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. Well, we know this to be a fact. There's what's called the Me Too hashtag. The Me Too hashtag is hundreds and thousands and millions of women who have been exploited by powerful men in these who are either big moguls in the business world, or big politicians, or big basketball players, or big baseball players, or big artists or singers or whatever, and they've exploited hundreds and millions of women by their money and their fame and taken advantage of them. See, so the Me Too hashtag, you see that all these so-called big people are actually scumbags, very low-class, demoniac people that just exploit others, and it's usually women. So it says here that the Manusmriti says that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maituna Agara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. In other words, means the imprisonment, the continued imprisonment of a living entity by the laws of nature, birth, death, old age, and disease. Therefore, thus, lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. Okay, so that's the negative part. But there is a positive part. The positive part is lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. In other words, if the mother and father, first of all, control their own lusty desires, and then work together to help their children also become free of lust. Because once one becomes lusty, which usually begins in puberty, where one begins to remember all the unfinished desires they had in the previous life, once one develops the lusty desires, then it's almost impossible to go back to love. But it is possible by Krishna consciousness. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So this is what differentiates an animal from a human being. Animals are unregulated, but human beings can be regulated. Animals are regulated to a certain degree by instinct, so they only mate in certain times of certain times of the year. But human beings, they want to mate all the time, you see. So they're more unregulated than the animals, so they're more animalistic than the animals themselves, who are regulated by instinct from God in certain ways. So it says here that nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. What are they? There are 4 things we should do and 4 things we shouldn't do. The 4 things we shouldn't do are meat eating, gambling, illicit sex, and speculation, or meat eating, gambling, and illicit sex, and so forth. And the things that we should do is regularly hear Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, regularly come to the temple and perform service, only eat prasadam, or food that's offered to Krishna first with love and devotion, and to engage in acts of devotional service. So there's 4 things we should do, 4 things we should not do. Those are what you would call regulative principles. So from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service to the Lord, and turn lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. So that is our real destiny as human beings. Animals cannot do this. They don't have the intelligence or the body to do it. They're completely wrapped up in their bodily needs. But human beings can engage in tapasya, voluntary renunciation of negative things, and voluntary acceptance of positive things for spiritual life. So eating, sleeping, mating, and defending his animal life. Chanting Hare Krishna, eating only prasadam, regularly hearing devotional literatures like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and discussing them and asking questions, and engaging in practical devotional service. These are the activities of regulated human beings who are on the fast path to go back to Godhead. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay, then we'll have Guru Puja. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Satma Bando Mui Sahabadana Mate Chanara Prasade Bhai E Bhavatori Ajay Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Shri Guru Charana Padma Satma Aranakoriya Mane Asa Guru Charane Rati Eseyu Tamagati Ye Prasade Pure Sava Asa Chakshudan Vilaje Janme Janme Prabhu Se Divya Jnana Hriday Prakasito Prema Bhakti Jaha Hoite Avidya Vinasajate Vedika Janara Charito Vedika Janara Charito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Lokena Lokera Jivana Ha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya Ebeas kusaki bhuvana. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Namah Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namani. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskadya Desatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Guru Hari Bol, Nitai Guru Hari Bol, Nitai Guru Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Jai Shri Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararajikachasta Tarasatara Shri Shri Mad. His Divine Grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vinda Ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Godam Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Jamuna Maya Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavana Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutali Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namani. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pracharani Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Dasatari. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish that my consciousness attachment to his lotus feet is perfection and fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him, ecstatic prema emanates. By him, ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter in lotus feet.